What if law schools needed you more than you needed them? I know it sounds completely backwards because for years, the admissions process has made you feel like they have all the power. They've got the rankings, they've got the prestige, and therefore they've got the leverage. And you're supposed to feel grateful just to get waitlisted. But something huge is changing quietly under the radar, and almost nobody is talking about it. And I'm not talking about LSAT format changes or another US news ranking drama. I'm talking about something structural, something baked into the actual math of the next decade. And once you understand it, you can make law school easier, cheaper, and more accessible than it's been in decades. There is a phenomenon happening right now called the demographic cliff. And it's not a theory or a prediction, it's simple math. Back in 2008, during the financial crisis, Americans had fewer kids, a lot fewer, and the birth rate never bounced back. Fast forward to today, those 2008 babies are now 17 years old, they're finishing law school, applying to college, and in a few years, they're going to be looking at law school. Now, here's the problem. There just aren't enough of them. We're not talking about a tiny 2% dip in the population. We're talking about a 20% drop in birth rates. That is millions of people who simply don't exist, which means fewer high school seniors, fewer college freshmen, fewer college graduates, all translating into fewer law school applicants. This trend is already being tracked in long-term enrollment models, and that demographic cliff is going to start hitting hard over the next few years. And so if you're applying to law school in the next, say, 3 to 7 years, you're entering the system right as this shift is happening. And that gives you real leverage because most people don't know that outside the top 14 law schools, most law schools are tuition dependent, meaning they rely heavily on your tuition dollars to survive. So when applications drop, they can't just say, oh, well, guess we'll admit fewer students. They've got to fill those seats, even if it means loosening standards, becoming more flexible, and being more generous when it comes to scholarship money. And that is already happening. You're going to see more things like application fee waivers, faster decisions, bigger scholarships, and optional essays that are truly optional. You're also going to see more online JDs popping up and schools more willing to match your scholarship offers. Even automatic merit aid for certain LSAT and GPA numbers. And this is not random. This is schools switching from gatekeeper mode to sales mode. The power dynamic is shifting in your favor, and you are not just some anonymous applicant anymore. You are the customer. Now, here's exactly what the demographic cliff is going to do inside admissions committees. First, it's going to lower admission standards. And I don't want to hype this up. It's not going to be dramatically lower, but it could be lower enough that you feel it in terms of lower LSAT cutoffs, lower GPA expectations, more leniency for gaps, career changes, imperfect transcripts, and as a result, more emphasis on life experience and application essays. You're also going to see bigger class sizes. And this surprises a lot of people when I mention it. But if a school used to get 3,000 applicants for 300 seats, and now they only get 2,000 applicants to make their budget work, they're not going to shrink the class. They're going to expand it because more seats means easier admissions for you. That is the result. You're also going to see more scholarship money. And this is just basic economics. When you have lower demand, they've got to raise their incentives. So you're going to see more merit aid, more need-based aid, more fee waivers, more competition between schools, more schools emailing you saying, we can match that after all, and even auto scholarships for hitting certain LSAT benchmarks. So all this shaping up to be the best environment for scholarships you're going to see for the next decade. And you're also going to see schools investing more to attract you. You might think fewer applicants means less spending, but schools are actually going to spend more on new buildings, expanded clinics, high-profile faculty hires, upgraded tech, and new specialty programs because they've got to sell you on applying. And this demographic cliff is not going to hit every school the same way. Harvard Law or Yale Law are not going to suddenly lower their standards, but lower-ranked schools, regional schools, are where we're going to see the biggest changes because these schools run on thin margins, and they are the most tuition dependent as a result. So that means they need you more than you need them. The top schools, the T14, the T6, they're going to be fine. They've got global reputation, strong job placement, and huge endowments. But even they might dip slightly in medians, admit more non-traditional applicants, older applicants, more background diversity emphasis, and more hybrid programs. Now, the mid-tier schools, those ranked, say, 20 to 80, those are where the biggest wins are going to show up. That is your golden opportunity because they need strong applicants to protect their medians, but they've also got to fill seats. So they're going to offer generous scholarships. They'll take in more students slightly below the medians. They'll admit earlier, and they will be more willing to negotiate. Now, most applicants hear all this, and they still apply randomly, and that's a mistake. You want to apply broadly, but not blindly. There are 3 categories of schools you should be looking at: reach schools, target schools, and safety schools. Reach schools are when your numbers are below their medians, still worth a shot because, of course, you could get lucky. Then you've got your target schools where your numbers match or slightly beat their medians. Then you've got the safety schools, and that's where you've got leverage. Even if you don't necessarily want to go there, their scholarship offers will help you negotiate with the other schools you do want. And all else being equal, better to apply earlier than later, because if you apply earlier, you get more money, you get faster decisions, you face less competition, and you get reviewed before medians are locked in. Now, all else being equal, better to apply earlier than later, but the thing is that, of course, all else is not equal because if you could get a higher LSAT by applying later, well worth delaying your applications at least a little bit. The January LSAT's not too late, and neither is the February LSAT. Now, regardless of when you apply, though, you've got to negotiate your offers, and they expect you to negotiate. That doesn't mean being aggressive, though. Just say to them, School B offered me X thousands more. I'd love to attend your program. Is there any flexibility to revisit my award? And a lot of the time, you'd be surprised, they will find the money. And of course, the biggest lever is to improve your LSAT score, because a few more points on the LSAT can mean better schools, bigger scholarships, and more negotiation power. And when the market is shrinking, the LSAT becomes even more valuable because schools want to cling to their medians. Now, there is this rise of online and part-time JD programs, well worth considering. They are no longer fringe. Schools like Southwestern, Syracuse, Mitchell Hamlin, even Georgetown, they're all offering legitimate online or hybrid JDs with full ABA approval. These programs let you keep your job, avoid relocating, you get to stay with your family, you could take classes on the evenings or weekends and finish with the same JD as everybody else, take the bar exam just like everybody else. Those used to be considered second tier, but they're now a major advantage, especially when the shrinking applicant market is going to hit hard in the next few years. And of course, this won't last forever. This is a temporary window. Eventually, schools will shrink class sizes to maintain their medians. Schools will merge and consolidate. More international students might fill the gap. US News is always adjusting their rankings formulas, of course, and the ABA will tighten accreditation standards if things get too loose. And of course, once people hear that law school is easier to get into, they're going to apply, and competition will rise once again, and your leverage will disappear. But for the short term, almost nobody knows about the demographic cliff, and that won't last, though. Now, forget the temporary cliff, of course, and just ask yourself where you want to be 3 years from now, because every year you wait is a year that you're not building legal skills, you're not creating momentum in your career, you're not earning attorney money, and you're not developing your network. And so this moment right now is unusually favorable, but that window won't stay open forever. And so you can wait and compete later, or you can act now while the door is wide open. Of course, it's your call. End rant. Okay, folks, so any thoughts on what I just shared there? I'm trying to mix it up a little bit, try out different formats for these free LSAT classes, a mix of lecture and lesson on either admissions or LSAT, and then, of course, getting into some LSAT drills. So I'm happy to entertain any questions y'all might have on the demographic cliff situation. We're kind of in a weird place right now because on the one hand, the impending demographic cliff means we're going to have fewer people applying to law school over the next few years. But in the short term, applicant numbers are actually up approximately 50% over the past 2 years, meaning that if there were 100 people 2 years ago applying, now there are 150 people applying this cycle, 50% more, But then we look ahead the next few years, applicant numbers are going to drop significantly. And so on the one hand, it's harder. On the other hand, it's easier. Weird mix. So it's getting harder and easier at the same time. It's a little bit of a paradox, which of course is par for the course when it comes to the LSAT. Now I've got some LSAT questions lined up for us all to cover. I've got number 1 pulled up on the screen. This is a negation drill. I'm going to read it out. When you've got your answer, just drop it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to something. So we've got number 1. All Pearson case files are confidential. What is the logical negation of this statement? A, some Pearson case files are not confidential. B, all Pearson case files are not confidential. C, no Pearson case files are confidential. Or D, some Pearson case files are confidential. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to an answer. So we're looking for, again, the logical opposite is the negation. The reason we cover negations is because that is the best strategy for approaching necessary assumption questions, one of the most common question types on the LSAT. So if we see all in the argument, the negation of that is not all, meaning some are not, which lines up, of course, with choice A. I see Osvaldo got it, Autumn got it, Giovanna got it. Fantastic. The answer is, in fact, A. I saw that somebody chose choice D as in Delta, changing all for some. Close, but not quite, because we want to change it from all to some are not. D says some are, and the word some still includes the possibility of all. We've also got a question here from La Actrice asking, thoughts on applying pending LSAT scores, is that the same as applying later? Somewhat. I mean, of course, if you're applying, you took your LSAT, you're waiting for your score to come back. You've got a couple of weeks before it does come back. But I never recommend applying not knowing what your score would be, because you want to apply with full information about where you stand. And if your score was not what you wanted, then of course, it's well worth retaking. So I'd wait and hold off on your application until you actually see what you got. So I hope that addresses that question. Let's move on to number 2. Well done, folks. Question number 2, continuing with negation. If L submits a brief, Emmett signs a form. What is the negation of this statement? A, L submits a brief and Emmett does not sign a form. B, L does not submit a brief and Emmett signs a form. C, L submits a brief and Emmett signs a form. Or D, L does not submit a brief and Emmett does not sign a form. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to an answer. So we have a conditional statement here. If L submits a brief, Emmett signs a form. What is the logical negation? We have a conditional statement, meaning that we want to negate the requirement. So we want to say there's a situation where L submitted a brief, yet Emmett did not sign a form, because that would negate the conditional relationship. To put it another way, L's submission requires Emmett's signing. L's submission requires Emmett's signing. So we want to say L's submission does not require Emmett's signing. It is possible for us to have the sufficient condition met, yet for the necessary to not logically follow. I see some folks dropped A in the chat, which is correct. L submits and Emmett does not sign. If that were the case, that would disprove the conditional relationship. So A is in fact the answer once again. Ms., Osvaldo, Autumn, Edward, all saying A. Well done. The answer is in fact A. A's situation disproves the conditional, which is of course the logical negation. On to number 3. Jimmy files a motion or Kim reviews a contract. What is the logical negation? A, Jimmy does not file a motion and Kim does not review a contract. B, Jimmy files a motion and Kim reviews a contract. C, Jimmy does not file a motion or Kim does not review a contract. Or D, Jimmy files a motion and Kim does not review a contract. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to an answer. So we have an or statement here. For an or statement to be true, we've just got to have at least one of those two things occurring. That's in the original format. So the truth of the statement requires at least one of those things to have occurred. To negate this statement, we want to say that neither one of those statements occurred. If we learned that neither one happened, the statement would be false. That would be the negation of that statement. So again, the truth of it requires at least one of these two things occurred. Either Jimmy filed or Kim reviewed. The negation of that would be neither occurred. I see a mix of answers in the chat here. Some folks saying A, some saying B, some saying C. I'll give folks another minute in case they want to give this a shot. Give folks another minute here. Okay, so the truth of the statement requires at least one of these things to have occurred. To negate it, we want to say that neither one occurred. So A as in apple, Jimmy doesn't file and Kim doesn't review. That being true would destroy the original because it's direct contradiction, logical opposite. So A is in fact the answer. If we learned that neither Jimmy filed nor did Kim review, that destroys the original. On to number 4. Lewis is a partner. Pretty simple statement there. Let's negate that. Lewis is a partner. Lewis is. We change that to what? I'm not going to say it. I'll just let you all drop it in the chat what you think. What is the logical negation of the original here? I see some folks dropping it in. Giovanna says A. Osvaldo says A. Miss says A. Yes, the answer is in fact A. Sometimes it is as straightforward as it seems. Lewis is. Negated becomes Lewis is not. That's it. If we learned Lewis is not, that destroys the statement that he is. On to number 5. No Harvard classmates are jurors. No Harvard classmates are jurors. What is the logical opposite? What is the negation here? So opposite of no or none is some, meaning at least one. At least one is, or some are. See some folks dropping an answer in the chat. Choice A, fantastic. Osvaldo, Edward, Giovanna, Passion, all saying A, Miss saying A. Yes, the answer is in fact A. Well done. No Harvard classmates are jurors. Negated means some Harvard classmates are jurors. Fantastic, folks. We're 5 in so far. Out of these 5, please drop in the chat how many you got right out of the number that you did. Let us know where you stand accuracy-wise so we can get a gauge on how to adjust the difficulty of these going forward. I see Giovanna is at 4 out of 5. Fantastic. Pretty solid accuracy. Osvaldo is at 5 out of 5. Pretty solid accuracy as well. Awesome. Love to see it. Y'all are doing great. Miss is 4 out of 5 as well. Sometimes a little bit tricky, sometimes a little bit not, but we're trying to throw some tougher ones in there. Now I'm going to share with you all another little lesson here about law school admissions. This is me recording some of my YouTube videos for you in advance. You get the first look at this. What if I told you there's a policy change coming in 2026 that's going to flip law school upside down, and almost nobody applying right now has even heard about it? I'm not talking about rankings or bar passage rates or admissions criteria. I'm talking about money, because starting in 2026, the federal government is putting a hard cap on how much you can borrow for law school. And this is not a small tweak. This is a direct hit to the business model every law school in America relies on to stay open. Right now, if a law school charges $85,000 a year, most students don't blink. Why? Because they know they can borrow it. Stafford loans, Grad PLUS loans, the government picks up the tab like a no-limit credit card. No hard caps, no credit check, no income verification. No one's asking whether the school's jobs outcomes justify the price. If the school says the cost of attendance is 90 grand, you can borrow 90 grand. If it's 300 grand over 3 years, you can borrow 300 grand. Because the money was always there, students took it. But that era is over. Starting July 1st, 2026, federal borrowing is capped at $50,000 per year total. And there's a $200,000 lifetime limit for all graduate borrowing combined. And Parent Plus loans are being phased out too. Translation, there is no more blank check. If your school costs $85,000 and you've only got $50,000 in federal loans, you now have a $35,000 gap every single year. And you can't just borrow your way out of it with federal money anymore. And this is not just a policy change, this is a market reset. Because when you cap borrowing, everything downstream changes. How schools price their programs, who can afford to attend, how much financial aid schools must give, who graduates debt-free, and which schools can even keep their doors open. So if you're applying in the next few years, you will live through this shift in real time. If you're a school built on the assumption that students can always cover the bill, you're in trouble. And this is not just a policy change, this is a turning point. And most applicants won't see it coming. Most schools will pretend nothing's happening. But the smart ones, the people paying attention, will see the reset happening right in front of them. For years, law school financing was simple. You took out Stafford loans, about $20,000 a year, then you filled the rest with unlimited Grad PLUS loans. And unlimited meant truly unlimited. The school sets the cost of attendance, and the government covers it. Tuition, fees, housing, books, personal expenses. You would just sign, click submit, and the money appeared. And this was all frictionless, maybe too frictionless. And that is exactly what made Grad PLUS both powerful and dangerous. Because if you remove all barriers to borrowing, you also remove the incentive to think or question or compare value. And for years, nobody did. But now there's going to be a new rule starting next year. You can only borrow $50,000 per year in total. And you can only borrow $200,000 total across all of graduate school combined. And so if your program costs $90,000, there's a $40,000 shortfall every single year. Federal loans are not going to save you. Parent loans will not save you. And private loans, I'm going to get to that in a second. But for the first time in decades, students will have to confront the question, how am I actually going to pay for law school? Not what's the ranking, or does the campus look nice, or do they have a clinic that looks cool? But can I afford this without destroying myself financially? And this is not a small change. This is the government drawing a hard line. Now, let's get brutally honest here. Law school tuition is not based on what education actually costs. It's based on what schools think students can pay. And for decades, what students can pay really meant whatever the federal government will lend them. That's why tuition spiraled out of control. I mean, think about it. If you got a high LSAT and a high GPA, you get a scholarship, aka a discount. If your stats are more middle of the pack, you pay more. If you're international, first gen, low information, you're often paying full price. Not fair, not transparent, and that system only works because of unlimited Grad PLUS. Once you cap borrowing, that whole fantasy collapses. Students will look at an $85,000 price tag and say to themselves, I literally cannot pay this. And schools will have to face reality for the first time in over 20 years. Now, most people assume loan caps hurt low-income first-gen or underrepresented students. But if you zoom out, it looks kind of like the opposite might be true. The students who got hurt the worst were the ones who borrowed the most for the schools with the worst outcomes. These students didn't have financial advisors, didn't have parents who went to grad school, didn't know how to evaluate risk, didn't know to negotiate scholarships, and they trusted in the school's branding and their promises. Then they borrow $250,000 for a school with 50% bar passage, 50,000 median salary, and 50% JD required employment. And that is catastrophic in terms of outcomes or ROI. And nobody warned them about it. Not the school, not the loan servicer, not the government, not the glossy marketing brochure. But capping loans stops that pipeline cold. It forces students to ask harder questions and forces schools to justify the price. That is not gatekeeping in my view, that is basic consumer protection. Now let's talk about the schools that are going to feel the pressure most. Private schools with huge tuition and tiny endowments, lower ranked schools with weak outcomes, and schools that relied on unlimited loans to fill seats, as well as schools with high need applicant pools. These schools have been playing a dangerous game. They admit anybody who says yes, and then they let the government pay the bill. That model is now dead. Once Grad PLUS disappears next year, the costs become real, yield for schools becomes unpredictable, aid budgets explode, enrollment drops, reputation drops, bar passage drops, and job placement drops. As a result of that, many schools are going to shrink, some will merge, some will quietly close their doors. That's just basic math. Now, you might hear people say that private lenders will step in, no reason to worry. But here's the thing: private loans are not guaranteed. They require credit checks, they often require loan cosigners, they often charge 10 to 15% interest and offer zero protections. And if your school has weak outcomes, a lender might simply say, we're not going to finance this. Private loans will help a small number of high credit score students attending strong schools, but they are not a replacement for Grad PLUS, and they were never meant to be. Now, everything so far that I've shared might sound kind of negative because we're talking about loan caps, budget gaps, schools at risk, and students scrambling. But let's step back for a second. This is exactly the correction legal education has needed for years, because the old system had unlimited borrowing with zero oversight. Schools were raising prices just because they could. So going forward, we're going to see fewer high debt borrowers. We're going to see reduced enrollment at lower tier schools. We're going to see more transparent pricing. We're going to see a focus on ROI more than rankings, and we will see real challenges to diversity. And schools that voice a desire for diversity will have to put real institutional money behind it. In other words, they'll have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. Now, students, as a result of all this, will be asking, what's the real cost? What's the real value? And what happens if this degree doesn't pay off? So I want you to treat yourself like an informed consumer, not like you're trusting blindly in what the school is telling you. Do your own research, do your own homework, look at the ABA 509 reports to look at the scholarship offers and the LSAT and GPA medians so you can be better informed about what you're going to do. End rant. Okay, folks, so any questions regarding what I just shared? I hope you found that helpful. I saw there was a question in the chat from Rose earlier asking, what do you think about merit scholarships now for LSATs for online JD degrees? Do you think they will give more scholarships for those who want to do the JD online degree? So I think that in general, schools are always looking to give merit aid if you can apply with numbers above the medians. That is the case for both online degrees as well as in-person degrees, part-time as well as full-time. Basically, merit scholarships, merit aid are across the board, something that schools offer because they want to raise their status in the ever-important US News Law School rankings, which from an admissions perspective, the biggest factors are your LSAT score, your GPA. Now, the thing is that your LSAT score is already your GPA is already pretty fixed because you're probably finished with undergrad or in your last year at the latest. And so you're only going to have minimal or negligible impact on your GPA, but your LSAT score is the biggest way to impact your odds. And so if you're looking for merit aid, the simplest, most straightforward way to go about that is to apply with a higher LSAT, get those numbers up to get more scholarship money. Dwight is asking, any tips for a reverse splitter? My GPA is super high, but my LSAT's super low. Biggest tip is get your LSAT up. I know that's pretty simple and straightforward, but that's really my biggest advice. If you want to improve your odds of getting in, you want to improve your odds of getting scholarship money, the simplest and most straightforward way to do that is to get a higher LSAT score. And so, of course, we've already got a month and a half till the next upcoming LSAT in January. We got 2.5 months till February. And so you're in the right place. Let's focus on improving your LSAT abilities so that you will no longer be a reverse splitter or a splitter of any sort. You'll have both a high LSAT and a high GPA and improve your odds of admission. So let's get back into the drills, folks. We're on to number 6 now. We're getting into inference questions, specifically most strongly supported reading comprehension style inference. Starting off here with question number 6, continuing on these drills. At Pearson Specter Lit, Harvey reviewed an internal case draft during a routine afternoon check of the file. After examining the pages, Harvey recorded a note about the draft in the firm's system to keep a clear record of his observation. What can we infer? A, Harvey reviewed the internal case draft only during the routine afternoon check. B, Harvey examined the pages before deciding whether to record any note at all. C, Harvey recorded a note about the draft in the firm's system. Or D, Harvey used the routine afternoon check to revise the internal case draft itself. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to an answer. So what can we infer based on this passage? What is the most reasonable or simple or most straightforward assumption we can make based on the text of the passage? And this will be incredibly moderate, something we already know based on the text. It is as simple and straightforward as it appears. No tricks here. I see some folks saying B, some folks saying C. So it is one of the two. Now, here's the tricky thing about B. We do know that he examined the pages and then he recorded a note. But did he decide to record a note only after examining the pages? Meaning, did his examination have an impact on his decision to record a note? The decision element of choice B is actually not supported in the text. We know that he examined the pages, then recorded a note, but we don't know if one caused the other. In other words, there's no causal element contained in the passage. So for that reason, B as in Bravo is incorrect. C as in Charlie is the answer. He recorded a note. That's it. He recorded a note about the draft in the firm system. That's all we know. So C is in fact the answer. Well done, folks. I see Passion, Giovanna, Moses, Miss all saying C. C is in fact correct. Well done. On to number 7. In preparing materials for a brief meeting at the Harvard Law Admissions Office, Elle compiled a short report about one recent applicant file. In that report, Elle listed one observation, recording it clearly so the office could refer to the observation later if needed. What can we infer? A, Elle created several observations in the report for the Harvard Law Admissions Office. B, Elle recorded a single clearly recorded observation in her report about the applicant file. C, Elle wrote a report so the office could avoid reviewing the applicant file. Or D, Elle listed an observation only after the Harvard Law Admissions Office requested the report. When you've got your answer, A, B, C, or D, please drop it in the chat. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to an answer. Again, reading comp inference, it is really as straightforward as it appears. I see some folks dropping answers in the chat here, which is awesome to see. I see Autumn says B, Giovanna says B, Moses, Osvaldo all saying B as in Bravo, Passion saying B as well. Fantastic. The answer is in fact B. Nice. Elle included a single clearly recorded observation in her report about the applicant file. We see that she listed one observation and she compiled a short report recording it clearly. So that all lines up with choice B as in Bravo. Well done, folks. Let's go on to number 8. At the Albuquerque office, Kim opened the electronic docket to confirm information about a recent filing connected to a client matter. As part of this routine review, Kim checked the status of the filing in the system and noted the status entry for the matter. What can we infer? A, Kim checked the status of every client matter in the Albuquerque office system. B, Kim opened the electronic docket mainly to revise the client matter in the system. C, Kim checked the status of the filing connected to the client matter. Or D, Kim used the status entry to change how the Albuquerque office handled filings. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to an answer. See a lot of folks dropping answers in. Awesome, love to see it. Again, you just go back to the passage and see which choice has support in the text. In this case, we're looking for a specific detail in the choices that appeared in the passage. The answer is in fact C as in Charlie. I see Miss, Moises, Osvaldo, Autumn, Giovanna all saying C as in Charlie and saying C. Welcome, Anne. Yes, the answer is in fact C. Kim checked the status lines up directly with the final sentence of the passage, and we can infer it's about, of course, the filing connected to the client matter. So that is what C says. Well done. On to number 9. A recent article describes how a journal handled submissions for a special issue outlining an initial review process used to screen manuscripts. In discussing that stage, the author states the initial review process was insufficient for reliably identifying the strongest submissions for a full evaluation. What can we infer? A, the author states the initial review process effectively identified the strongest submissions. B, the author believes the special issue itself was insufficient for full evaluation. C, the author states the initial review process was insufficient for the journal's purposes. Or D, the author argues the initial review process should be replaced with a new system. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat. A, B, C, or D. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to something. I'll give folks a minute. I do see some folks dropping answers in though, which is great. All right, folks. So I see a lot of folks choosing C, which is awesome. Osvaldo and Miss all saying C. Moises saying C. Osvaldo saying C. Autumn saying C. Yes, the answer is in fact C. Well done. The initial review process was insufficient for the journal's purposes. They say at the very end, initial review process was insufficient. So lines up. That's the answer. Well done, folks. On to number 10. A working group at Pearson Specter Lit prepared several options for a new internal procedure and was circulated one formal proposal to the partners. In describing the current plans, the passage states the proposal is not part of the pilot program the firm is running this quarter. What can we infer? A, the proposal is currently the main focus of the firm's pilot program. B, the proposal is not included in the pilot program the firm is running. C, the working group created a pilot program to support the circulated proposal. Or D, the pilot program and the proposal describe the same internal procedure option. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to an answer. I see some folks starting to drop answers in, which is great. Welcome, Max. So they say in the final sentence that the proposal is not part of the pilot program. That means it is not included in the pilot program the firm is running. So that lines up, of course, with choice B as in Bravo. I see here that Osvaldo, Giovanna, Edward, Max, and Miss all saying B as in Bravo. B is in fact correct. Well done, folks. We're 10 in so far. Out of these 10, please drop in the chat how many you got right out of the number that you did. Give us a sense of where you stand accuracy-wise, so I know how to adjust difficulty going forward. I know we had some questions on my last lecture here. Imagine was asking, do law schools prefer splitters or reverse splitters? Great question. Of course, ideally, your numbers are high on both LSAT and GPA. But if we look at the stats, and if we look at the law school's admissions indices, which is the formula they use to relate your LSAT score to your GPA to calculate your odds of admission to help them boost their status, nearly every law school in the US weighs your LSAT score more heavily than your undergraduate GPA. Meaning, all else being equal, better to have a high LSAT than to have a high GPA. Of course, ideally, you want both a high LSAT and a high GPA, but due to rampant grade inflation, having a high GPA isn't as valuable as it used to be. If we look at the T14 LSAT medians, GPA medians are all 3.8 to 3.9, which means basically that high GPAs are a dime a dozen. You want to ideally have a high LSAT if you can. But regardless, of course, like I said earlier, your GPA is probably pretty fixed in time at this point. Not too much you can do to impact it, but your LSAT score, plenty of room to improve it significantly. And of course, even if you've taken it before, you can, of course, retake it again. I see folks are doing great with these drills, by the way. Giovanna's at 9 out of 10. Osvaldo's 9 out of 10. Mrs. 9 out of 10. Anne's got 3 for 3. pretty solid accuracy on these folks. Well done. I see that Murray is saying she did 4, got 1 wrong, so she's 3 for 4. Pretty good as well. So we had another question, Sudania asking, do you know if schools are going to want to increase their scholarship amounts or reduce tuition? Well, they're kind of doing both in a way, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a wash. Reducing tuition is effectively the same as giving more scholarships to everybody. I saw there was one school in California that is maintaining their sticker tuition, but then also giving everybody an automatic scholarship as well. So if the sticker price is, say, $90,000, but they give everybody $20,000 off, then the sticker price is meaningless. Kind of like when businesses give Black Friday specials, right? They artificially inflate the price, then they offer a discount. Is it really a discount, or are they just reducing the amount? At the end of the day, it's just kind of window dressing what you call it, but at the end of the day, it has no impact whether you call it one or the other. It is what it is. Now, of course, from your perspective, all you can do is just look to improve your numbers, improve your odds to get the best possible outcomes. And the best way to do that at this stage is, of course, to get a higher LSAT score to offset your relatively lower GPA. So I'm going to share another lesson with you all on reviews in particular, talking about online forms, and that scores are coming out Wednesday. And by the way, folks, I'm doing a several-hour live stream on this Wednesday starting at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. November LSAT scores are coming out in 2 days. And so to support everybody who took the November LSAT and is getting their scores back on Wednesday, I'm not going to do 2 p.m. Eastern like I usually do. This Wednesday, I'm going to do 8:30 a.m. and go for at least a few hours, same format like today, but maybe more of a focus on January and February LSAT takers in particular, crafting your study plan, retake prep as well. I know the forums go crazy at that time of year, and so avoid the chaos and all the stress around that. We'll be trying to have a lower stress situation here on the live class, going over more practical steps you can take in terms of bettering your situation whenever you're taking the LSAT, whether it's January, February, April, June, or beyond. Javon is asking, are we meeting on Friday? No, so there's no class on Friday or Thursday. We're taking the long weekend off, but we're doing tomorrow, same time, Wednesday morning, and then we'll reconvene again on Monday. So I'm going to record another video with you all here. You'll get to see it first. Then we'll do some more drills. So I'm going to be talking now about some of the forums and the stress that they engender and how to avoid that situation. Before you trust a single LSAT Reddit review, I want you to stop, because one wrong thread, one unexamined opinion, one emotionally charged rant from a stranger you will never meet can quietly derail your entire LSAT study plan. It can shift how you see questions, how you interpret difficulty, how you judge prep companies, and worst of all, how you see yourself. And the dangerous part is it feels like research, it feels productive, it feels like doing due diligence, but it's not. So today, I want to talk to you as a mentor who's watched thousands of students succeed and thousands more sabotage themselves in ways they never saw coming. Because I've watched LSAT Reddit review threads wreck people's confidence, their strategy, their mental health, and in some cases, their entire admissions cycle. Now, don't get me wrong, Reddit can be amazing. It can make you feel less alone. It can give you community, solidarity, and emotional relief you don't get from your bookshelf full of LSAT prep books. But it is not a great place to decide whether a question was flawed, whether a prep book is good, whether a course is scammy, whether you're studying the right way, or whether you're behind in the cycle. So today, I want to walk you through how to read LSAT Reddit reviews without losing your sanity, your confidence, or your focus. And by the end of this video, if you take nothing else away, I want you to walk away with a deep, almost unshakable understanding of one core truth. You can't build a 170 plus LSAT score on the emotional debris of strangers. Now, I want to talk about something human, something vulnerable, something I've never really talked about publicly. Back when I was studying for the LSAT, I did what you're doing right now. I read every LSAT prep Reddit thread I could find. I read reviews of courses, reviews of books, reviews of tests, reviews of specific questions. And at the time, I felt like I was getting smarter. But what I was really doing was outsourcing my confidence. Every time I read someone say, this prep test was brutal, or this question is unfair, or this course ruined my score, I took that on as gospel. Reddit became my lens, and that lens warped my reality. And now, 20 years later, after working with thousands of LSAT students, I finally understand why. LSAT Reddit reviews don't measure the truth. They measure stress, they measure insecurity, and how overwhelmed someone felt when they wrote that post. And that realization changed everything for me. Now let's get into the mechanics of why LSAT Reddit reviews are so misleading. The first big factor is beginner bias. Most LSAT reviews are written by people who are scoring in the 140s or 150s. They're stressed, they haven't mastered the fundamentals, they confuse discomfort with poor question design, and they conflate something feeling unfair with being logically valid but confusing. And this is not me criticizing anybody. This is me saying they're writing from the middle of the storm. Let me tell you a quick story. A few months ago, a student in my coaching program messaged me saying, Reddit thinks this question is broken. I think LSAC messed up. And of course, they didn't. LSAC did not mess up. What happened was the question punished a blind spot, and Reddit validated that student's frustration. And the student internalized that validation as fact. That is beginner bias. The second factor is emotional transference. Most LSAT Reddit reviews aren't really reviews. They are emotional outbursts dressed up as analysis. Let's say, for example, somebody has a rough practice test. They go straight to Reddit and they type a 500-word LSAT course review Reddit post in the heat of the moment. And you, who weren't there, you read it and you subconsciously absorb their emotional state. And then your brain is mirroring what they wrote. That is psychology, and it's only too human, but it's not helping you. Because someone who feels lost is not in a position to give you clarity. And the third factor is the validation loop. And this one's a bit more subtle. When a student hits a tough question, there's this quiet, almost invisible shame that appears. They'll think to themselves, I should have gotten that one. And to avoid sitting with that feeling and that discomfort, they go onto Reddit to look for people who also missed that same question. And then suddenly they'll see 12 people saying, this question was weird, this one felt unfair, this one was badly written. And they feel instant relief that it wasn't them and it was the question. But the dark side of that relief is that it destroys your ability to learn from your mistakes. Reddit becomes an anesthetic rather than analysis. Now let's get into the real meat, the recurring patterns that make LSAT Reddit reviews misleading. There are 5 illusions that I see over and over again. The first illusion is a bad question, meaning a bad feeling. Students will use bad to describe questions that made them uncomfortable. But your discomfort does not mean the question was bad. Discomfort on the LSAT usually means that you misunderstood something. The argument, the conditional link, you didn't see the flaw, you misinterpreted the scope. And discomfort is a diagnostic. It is a tool to help you improve, but Reddit treats it like a verdict. The second illusion is that if something is hard, it must be unfair. The LSAT is never unfair. It's unflattering, sure. Of course, it exposes your blind spots, it reveals your patterns, it punishes your assumptions, and Reddit takes those moments personally. But the LSAT is not personal. It is remarkably precise. Now, the third big illusion is that people rate resources by their score outcomes, not the quality of their usage. So for example, let's say that somebody uses a prep book and their score doesn't go up. So they immediately write, this book is terrible. But they never ask, did I use the methods correctly? Did I practice enough? Did I apply the techniques consistently? Did I do the foundational lessons before jumping into drills? People will blame the tool when the real issue is their technique. The fourth illusion is that people don't understand their own learning styles, because Reddit loves best of threads, like what's the best LSAT course, the best LSAT book, the best logical reasoning explanation videos. But that's like asking, what's the best diet? What's the best workout routine? There's no one best. It depends. People want certainty when life is uncertain. Some people need visual frameworks. Others need repetition drills. Others need structure and accountability. And there's no one best. There's only the best for you. But Reddit collapses that nuance. And the final illusion here is that high scores and low scores are treated as equals. A 175 scorer saying the flaw is a causal jump carries the same weight on an anonymous form as a 148 scorer saying this question is weird. Imagine a surgeon saying, here's what's wrong with this surgical technique, and a first-year undergrad saying, yeah, I agree, the scalpel felt awkward. That's how LSAT Reddit works. You don't know who's writing. So let's talk about how to evaluate Reddit threads without destroying your score. First, you want to assess the reviewer's score level. If they're not at or above your target score, filter what they say with a heavy degree of caution and skepticism. This doesn't mean that low scores are wrong. They're just early in the journey. But their reviews tell you more about their current struggle than the quality of the resource. You also want to separate emotional reactions from analytical critiques. If they're emotional and they say, I hated this, this was weird, it felt off, didn't make sense, you probably want to discount it. On the other hand, if they're more analytical and they say, the explanation uses pattern recognition, which didn't fit my learning style, or this teacher's examples moved too quickly for me, or I misunderstood the indicator words, the method didn't fail, I just misapplied it, that's a lot more useful. You want to also ID if the person used the resource properly. And this is huge. If someone skipped lessons, if they drilled without reviewing, if they mixed strategies from multiple companies, if they studied passively instead of actively, or they didn't track mistakes, their review is skewed. And you cannot review a strategy that you did not apply correctly. You also want to check the reviewer's goals, because somebody trying to go from a 147 to a 155 is very different from somebody trying to go from a 165 to a 175. Someone trying to improve in reading comp has different needs than someone struggling in logical reasoning. So if their goals don't fit yours, you want to filter accordingly. And you also want to watch for the validation loop. If the thread feels like everybody here is also angry about this question also, you want to be careful, because that is not a true consensus. That's just people sharing their anxiety. Now, discussions of individual questions are dangerous because people often are missing subtle logic. They confidently explain things incorrectly. They argue based on non-LSAT reasoning, and they defend their wrong answers emotionally. So you want to look for structure-based explanations, not linguistic ones. A bad explanation would say, this answer felt more right, or this wording seemed clearer. A good explanation is specific. It says, this commits a part-to-whole fallacy, or this conclusion overextends the premise, or the correct answer preserves the conditional chain. You also want to avoid threads debating fairness, because 99% of supposedly unfair questions are perfectly normal. So if the thread says, this one feels ambiguous, this one's worded strangely, or LSAC messed up, you want to skip that one because that is emotional transference. You also want to trust high scorers over group sentiment. If a 172 score gives a clear breakdown and 20 people with low scores disagree, you want to trust the high scorers. Now, I want to give you my exact playbook for evaluating resources like books, courses, methods, tutors, without outsourcing your judgment to random strangers. First, you want to evaluate based on actual LSAT logic. You want to use resources that help you break things down, teach you standard flaws, teach you conditional logic, teach you structure, and teach you techniques rather than cheap tricks. If a resource does that consistently, it's a good resource. You also want to give it time, ideally at least 10, 15 hours of work with the resource before you evaluate it. If you've only done 2 lessons, 2 chapters, 1 practice section, 1 bad day, it's not enough of a sample to make a fair evaluation. Most LSAT progress is nonlinear. You got to give it time. You also want to make sure the resource is updated for the current LSAT, because of course the LSAT has changed. Logic games are off the test, reading comp is evolving, logical reasoning is the majority of the test. Make sure the resource reflects that. Old reviews from a couple of years back are outdated. You also want to use a 3-question litmus test. Does the resource make you faster? Does it make you more accurate? And does it make you more confident? If it does 2 out of the 3, keep it. But if it doesn't do any of them, of course, skip it and move on. Now, none of this is really about test strategy. It's about emotional regulation. When you're studying for the LSAT, you're not just solving problems. You are constantly managing your feelings, anxiety, doubt, confusion, comparison, and insecurity. Reddit gives you immediate relief, but that relief is expensive. A student once told me, Steve, I saw a thread saying the LSAT is getting harder, and it ruined my entire week. Not because the test changed, but because their perception of the test changed. And that perception influenced their confidence, confidence influenced performance, performance influenced emotion, and emotion influenced Reddit usage. And the cycle repeats. That is the emotional validation loop, and it is the silent killer of LSAT progress, and so you've got to break that loop. So to bring this full circle, Reddit is a great place for community, encouragement, feeling less alone, and celebrating victories, but it's not the place to build your study plan, your technique, your confidence, your interpretation of LSAT difficulty, or your beliefs about prep books or courses. After all, you are aiming for law school, right? You're training to be a thinker, a reasoner, a person who can filter information, weigh it, analyze it, and choose wisely. If you cannot do that by outsourcing your judgment to the loudest voice, let me start over. You cannot do that if you outsource your judgment to the loudest voices on LSAT Reddit. So I want you to reclaim your judgment, trust your mind, and build your score from a place of clarity, not chaos. And treat LSAT Reddit reviews the same way you treat LSAT answer choices. You're skeptical, you're questioning everything, looking for structure, filtering out emotion, finding what is logically supported, and ignoring what is not. Do that, and you will grow faster, score higher, and stay far more grounded. You deserve that, and you've worked too hard not to succeed, and you're too smart to let strangers steer the wheel. End rant. So I've got to see some questions coming in here. From Moses asking, I've got my score coming out on Wednesday. Good luck. Hope you rock it. What do you think is the deciding factor in determining retesting? So it comes down to where you were scoring going in, and how does your actual score relate to your practice test score average? So let's say your PT average going in was a 170. If you scored below 170, you know you are capable of more, and it's well worth considering a retake. If your PT average was at 170 and you scored 170, that's good. You could reasonably walk away feeling confident that you got what you deserved. But here's the thing. Through luck alone, you could do a few points better. There is a score band or margin of error of a couple points on each end. Meaning, if your true deserved score is at 170, one day you might get a 167, another day you might get a 173, and the LSAT is still considered valid. So through luck alone, you could do a few points better. And if you don't, no big deal, because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest. And so I recommend for this reason that everybody retake the LSAT at least once, because there's no reason not to. So unless you scored above your PT average, I would say it's well worth retaking. The January LSAT's not too late. Neither is February. Any other questions before we continue with the drills? How do you like the format, by the way? Is this fun to change it up a little bit, mixing it up between the drills and the lessons? I think this is kind of fun. I'll probably do this on Wednesday, actually. Any topic requests for Wednesday? I know I'm talking about the Wednesday score release, several-hour, multi-hour LSAT extravaganza. We're going to cover retakes, January prep, February prep, admissions this time of year. Those are the biggest things on my mind around November LSAT score release, but I could also, of course, take into consideration some other topics if you'd like. But anyway, let's continue. Going on to number 11, continuing the drills. Now we're doing formal logic inference. Number 11, Harvey's memo states that every associate assigned a merger file must submit a preliminary report. The memo also notes that Harvey is currently assigned a merger file. Therefore, the memo indicates that Harvey must submit a preliminary report. What can we infer? A, Harvey is the only associate who must submit a preliminary report. B, Harvey must submit a preliminary report. C, some associates assigned to merger files do not submit preliminary reports. D, every associate submits a preliminary report for every merger file. Or E, Donna must also submit a preliminary report. So when you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat. A, B, C, D, or E. Yes, I included E this time. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to an answer. So we're doing formal logic inference, A, B, C, D, or E. We have an E this time. What can we reasonably infer based on the information in the passage? So first sentence, we have a conditional. Every associate assigned a merger file must submit a preliminary report. Then we learn Harvey's got a merger file. Therefore, he must submit a preliminary report. Yep, so B as in Bravo, of course, lines up directly with what's in the passage. We already know that. So not even really new information. It is sometimes really that straightforward and simple. See some folks dropping B in the chat. I see Osvaldo, Giovanna, Max, Rose, Moises all saying B as in Bravo. B is in fact correct. Well done. On to number 12. L's case summary records else case summary records at least one witness who is both a salon customer and a frequent visitor. The summary further explains that every frequent visitor is documented in the visitor log. Therefore, the summary establishes that at least one salon customer is documented in the visitor log. What can we infer? A, every salon customer is documented in the visitor log. B, at least one salon customer is documented in the visitor log. C, no salon customers are documented in the visitor log. D, L documented every visitor personally in the visitor log. Or E, the frequent visitor is the only person in the visitor log. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat, A, B, C, D, or E. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to something. See some folks dropping answers in, but I'll give it another minute. I know that for these, by the way, the correct answer is pretty straightforward. It's the only thing that is that the other choices make it harder to spot. So you might want to work by process of elimination. If you can knock out the others, then whatever remains has got to be it, right? See some folks dropping B as in Bravo in the chat, which lines up directly with the conclusion. That's it. We're just identifying the conclusion essentially here. So I see here that, let's see who got it. Rose, Giovanna, Moises, Max, Osvaldo, all saying B as in Bravo. B is in fact correct. At least one salon customer documented lines up directly with the final sentence. Also, by the way, note that more moderate choices are more likely to have been supported by the stimulus than more extreme ones would be. So when in doubt, gravitate towards some or at least one rather than every, none, always, all, too extreme. On to number 13. Kim's case file states that no client is both a confidential informant and a flagged contact. It also notes that at least one client is a confidential informant who met with a reviewer. Therefore, the file shows that at least one reviewer met with someone who is not a flagged contact. What can we infer? A, every reviewer met with only flagged contacts. B, at least one reviewer met with someone who is not a flagged contact. C, no confidential informants met with any reviewers. D, all confidential informants are flagged contacts in this file. Or E, Kim flagged the reviewer who met with the informant. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat, A, B, C, D, or E. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to something. All right, I see some folks dropping it in here. Let's see. Moises says B, Giovanna says B, Osvaldo, Max, Rose, Giovanna all saying B. Yes, B is in fact correct. Again, just strictly identifying the conclusion, matching it up with what's in the passage. B says at least one reviewer met with someone who's not a flagged contact. That's exactly what the conclusion says. That's it. It really is that simple. On to 14. The report states that all documents reviewed by the analyst are archived. It also indicates that at least one archived document is tagged for follow-up and that every follow-up item is scheduled for review. Therefore, the report shows that at least one archived document is scheduled for review. What can we infer? A, all archived documents are scheduled for review by the analyst. B, at least one archived document is scheduled for review. C, no archived documents are tagged for follow-up in the report. D, every follow-up item is archived by the analyst personally. Or E, the analyst reviews every document tagged for follow-up. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat, A, B, C, or D, or E. And if you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to something. See some folks dropping answers in here. Also, I see Max, Rose, random person, Moises, Giovanna, Osvaldo all saying B as in Bravo. B as in Bravo is in fact correct, lining up with the final sentence once again. Well done, folks. On to number 15. A firm memo specifies that every associate preparing a deposition outline must also submit a briefing note, and that every such associate must meet with a reviewer. Therefore, the memo states that every associate preparing a deposition outline must submit a briefing note and meet with a reviewer. What can we infer? A, every associate submits a briefing note for all deposition outlines. B, some associates who meet reviewers do not submit briefing notes. C, Donna meets with a reviewer for every deposition outline she prepares. D, every associate preparing a deposition outline submits a briefing note and meets a reviewer. Or E, only associates preparing deposition outlines meet with reviewers. When you've got your answer, please drop it in the chat, A, B, C, D, or E. If you're not sure, just drop a question mark, but do commit to an answer. Give folks a minute to drop their answers in here. Got a mix of answers here. I love it. I love it when there's a mix. Did I get some people here? So I see some folks saying D, some saying E, someone saying A. Again, all else being equal, gravitate towards more moderate language, more likely to have been supported by the stimulus than more extreme language would be. So that's one comment I have. Another is always go back to the text, right? So E as in echo says only associates preparing deposition outlines meet with reviewers. They are the only ones. So if someone's meeting with a reviewer, it must be an associate preparing a deposition outline. Do we know that from the text? In the passage, first sentence, they say, every associate preparing a deposition outline must also submit a briefing note, and every associate must meet with a reviewer. But does that mean that if you met with a reviewer, you must have been one of these associates? Not necessarily. Being an associate guarantees you meet with a reviewer. So it's sufficient to tell us you met with a reviewer, but it's not necessary to meet with a reviewer, meaning that maybe other people meet with reviewers also. So for this reason, E as in echo is incorrect. It is confusing necessary and sufficient conditions. In contrast, we know two things about the associates. First, they meet with, if they are preparing an outline, they also submit a briefing note. And two, they meet with a reviewer. So D as in delta captures both of those pieces of information from the passage that are outlined in the first half and summarized in the second half. So D as in delta matches up. E as in echo is a distortion, confusing necessary and sufficient conditions. So D as in delta is in fact correct. Well done. I see Giovanna got it. Moses got it. Osvaldo got it. The answer is D as in delta, a little bit harder for that one. Well done, folks. I see a lot of folks got it as well on TikTok. Awesome. I saw we had a question earlier from Marissa that I missed, and so I wanted to get to that now before I wrap up. So thanks for your great question, Marissa. Marissa was asking here, let me pull that up. If I apply in September, can I take the test in March and June and be okay? Yeah, so LSAT scores are good for 5 years, meaning that if you take it in March or June coming up, you can then apply to law school in September later that year and be okay. So in other words, we're now at the end of November. So let's say you're taking the LSAT in roughly 4 months or so, 4 to 6 months or so. You take it 4 to 6 months from now, you apply approximately 8 or 9 months from now. That's totally fine. Scores are good for 5 years on your record. So no reason to delay the LSAT or push it back or take it later or take it earlier. Take it whenever you're ready. There's no LSAT in March, by the way. It's offered 8 times a year. So the next LSATs coming up are January, February, April, June. Those are the ones that we know about coming up. You could take any one of those and apply to law school next cycle. You could even take January, February and apply to law school this cycle to start law school in September. But if you wanted to take it in the spring or summer and then apply in the fall, that's also totally fine. That way you're applying at the beginning of next cycle, also a great move to do. And by the way, folks, if you find these classes helpful, We offer them every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern time, 1 Central, 11 Pacific time. We're going to meet again tomorrow, same time, same place. Then Wednesday, we're meeting at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time for November LSAT score release. This one's going to be a little bit different. We're going to have more of a focus on retake prep for those who took November and are getting their scores back that morning. We'll also talk about January and February LSAT prep for those of you taking it in a couple months, and of course, April and June and beyond. And by the way, folks, if you would like some personal support, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody out there watching this. You can book your call with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link below the video on YouTube, link in bio on TikTok. I'll see you all tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.